I sat down to make this video because the last one I posted didn't feel finished. It sat with me. I kept thinking about the things I left unsaid, the pieces that still needed to be said out loud. So this is me trying again. Not a polished speech, not a list of tips, just me talking to you the same way I talk when I'm trying to figure something out for myself. Life has become a subscription service. That sentence sounds dramatic until you look at how we actually live now. You pay to stay alive. You pay for the roof. You pay for the food. You pay for the ability to move money. You pay for the right to keep the digital things you already bought. And every time the company decides, the terms have changed, you either pay more or you lose access. That is not an overstatement. That is the operating system of modern life. Our parents and their parents lived in houses they owned or were on a clear path to owning. Today, a huge part of this country, especially younger people and people who got hit by health or debt, live as permanent renters. Most of the paycheck goes to rent and food. Everything else is residual. In the high tech era, we were promised more freedom and more abundance. Instead, a lot of us need continuous medical management that only works if the insurance keeps covering it. Health itself became a subscription. Miss a payment, change jobs, hit a lifetime maximum, or get dropped, and the care stops. That is not theoretical. That is how the system is built. Then look at media. We traded physical ownership for convenience. We stopped buying the disc, the tape, the book, the game cartridge. Streaming felt better, instant, everywhere. The problem is that the moment everything moved behind a subscription or a digital license, ownership disappeared. You can buy a movie, a game, an ebook, and years later the company decides the license is revoked. It vanishes from your library. We have already watched this happen with games, films, and books. The message is clear. You never owned it. You rented access for as long as they felt like granting it. For years, people repeated the line that we will own nothing and be happy. The reality is the opposite. Owning nothing produces a low grade, constant anxiety. You're always one policy change, one price hike, one platform decision away from losing something you thought was yours. That pressure builds. People are starting to push back, not with slogans, with practical exits. They are building digital libraries of media they actually control. They are buying physical media again, especially older physical media that still works without a server check. They are putting storage in their own homes instead of paying forever for cloud accounts. They are running local media servers so music, movies, shows, and games stream from a machine they own. Some are looking at places where buying real property is still realistic. The common thread is the same: reduce the number of companies that can flip a switch and take something away from you. I am one of those people. This is not abstract for me. After 2020, a lot of us lost a certain kind of trust in institutions and in the idea that the systems around us were basically stable and fair. Then the following years kept delivering examples, payment processors deciding which games were allowed to exist on Steam and other platforms, digital ID and identity checks spreading into more corners of the internet, age verification requirements that treat ordinary information the same way they treat adult content. Even certain Wikipedia pages about real events started requiring verification in some contexts. Sony signaling the end of physical media. Every one of those moments reinforced the same lesson. If the infrastructure is not yours, your access is provisional. That is what pushed me off stock Windows and stock Android. I moved my laptop and desktop to Linux. I put Graphene OS Chess on my Pixel. The point was not ideology, the point was control. When the operating system and the phone software are under someone else's full authority, they can decide what runs, what gets updated, what gets restricted, and what gets wiped. Linux and Graphene OS make that much harder. You keep more of the decision making power on hardware you physically possess. That single shift changed how I think about every other layer. From there, I started building a home lab, A home lab is just a personal setup at home where you can run services, store data, and experiment without depending on outside companies for every basic function. Mine is centered on a NAS. I use it for media servers, Jellyfin for video, Navidrome for music. Like I can stream my own library to any device in the house or with the right setup remotely. I shaped the interfaces so they feel familiar, like the services I used to pay for, except the files stay on drives I own. I also run Keywix. That lets me keep large offline collections, including a full Wikipedia dump and other knowledge bases. When the internet is slow, restricted, or simply not there, the information is still available. I back up software, emulator setups, Linux distributions, and anything else I do not want to hunt for again if a site disappears or a download link dies. A lot of people in this space are not just collecting, they are preparing. They treat data the way earlier generations treated food storage or tools. Access can get worse. Platforms can change rules overnight. Payment processors can decide what is allowed. Having local copies and local servers is a way to keep options open. The work never really ends. Every week there is something new to back up, another system to set up, another failure mode to plan around. It is exhausting. I spend a large part of most days on this. The more you do, the more you see how much is still outside your control. You cannot prepare for everything. You can reduce single points of failure. That is the actual goal. Own the storage, own the playback, own the knowledge. Stop needing constant permission from companies that do not share your interests. The same logic applies to attention. I got rid of almost every social media platform except YouTube. On the browser, I use Unhook. On the phone, I use Morphe for YouTube. Those tools strip away the home feed, the recommendations, the shorts, the end screens, the endless suggestions. PocketTube lets me put the small number of channels I still watch into groups. I check those. That is it. I do not let the algorithm decide what enters my head. I do not follow world event channels. I do not sit in doomer content. Most of what passes for news is noise designed to keep you reactive. I decided I do not need that in my system. When something actually matters, someone who knows me will tell me. Until then, I stay out of the feed. That choice has a cost. I know less about the daily churn of the world. That is deliberate. It also means I spend less time in the outrage loop that used to shape my mood. The trade-off is real. Building the infrastructure and maintaining the boundaries takes time that used to go into making more videos. My output dropped, my headspace changed. Some days, the whole project feels like I traded one cage for another. The old cage was constant subscription payments and algorithmic influence. The new one is the ongoing labor of self-reliance. Both cost energy. Only one of them leaves me with something I can still control when the external conditions change. Debt was another layer. I moved hard to clear what I could. Student loans and tax debt are gone. Personal debt is the remaining target. The plan is to finish that this year. Parallel to that, I stripped out most of the synthetic personal care products, natural soap, natural toothpaste, natural lotion, natural shaving cream, natural deodorant, small things. They add up. Every product that does not require a continuous corporate relationship is one less dependency. Redundancy became a habit. Drives are mirrored. Income streams are not singular. Entertainment is local first. Communication options are being explored so that email and voice are not solely dependent on the big providers. Mesh networking is on the list. Local message systems that do not need the public internet. None of this is finished. All of it is in progress. The deeper lesson is about infrastructure. If someone else owns the land, the server, the platform, the identity layer, then your position is always provisional. You are a tenant. Tenants can be moved. Look at any platform that has changed its rules, demonetized creators, removed content, or altered the algorithm overnight. The people who built audiences on those platforms discovered they did not own the relationship with their viewers. The platform did. That is why I am planning my own place for the content. A site I control. Email lists I control. Distribution that does not disappear. Because a company decided, the terms changed. The Pirate Bay is an extreme example of what happens when the data and the audience relationship sit outside a single company's control. Mirrors appear. The material keeps circulating. The principle is the same, even if the content is completely different. Ownership of the infrastructure changes the power balance. Knowledge compounds the same way. Learning Linux made Graphene OS easier. Understanding Linux made media servers, remote access, and even macOS command line work more natural. Emulation knowledge grew out of the same foundation. Once you can preserve and run older software, you stop needing the original company to keep the servers online. Skills transfer. Documentation matters. I moved from Apple Notes to Obsidian because I needed something that treats notes like a real knowledge base. Markdown, linking, local files. It functions as a second brain. Solutions get written down once, so I never have to solve the same problem from scratch again. Offline AI tools sit on the same machines. Local models for research and image work. No account, no usage limits that can be changed by policy. Just compute eye control. Housing follows the same rule. Renting forever means you are always exposed to inflation and to someone else's decisions about the property. Inflation is the quiet tax. Money supply expands, purchasing power drops, asset prices and rents rise. If you cannot buy where you currently are, the rational move is to look for places where ownership is still possible. Second citizenship and property abroad are not about abandoning one country. They are about creating options, a place you can go, a property that generates some income under management, a reduction in single points of failure. Perfect security does not exist. Better positioning does. The same principle applies to health knowledge. I'm starting to learn herbs and practical natural approaches within reason. Growing some of it myself is the logical next step. Indoor plants, window setups, basic cultivation. Again, less dependence on a continuous supply chain that can be interrupted or repriced. None of this is about becoming completely separate from society. It is about refusing to live as a permanent subscriber to every essential layer of life. Freedom is not free. It is paid for in time, in learning curves, in the daily maintenance of systems that used to be someone else's problem. The work does not end. You just get better at choosing which dependencies are acceptable and which ones are not. I am still in the middle of it. Some days it feels heavy. Other days it feels like the only sane response to a world that keeps converting ownership into rental agreements. That is the core of it. Life was sold to us as more convenient when everything became a service. The convenience came with a quiet transfer of power. The response is not rage for its own sake. The response is to rebuild ownership where it still matters: the files, the knowledge, the hardware, the property, the attention, the skills. Start with one layer, make it solid, add the next, keep going. Once the basic NAS was running and Jellyfin was streaming video without depending on any outside company, the next layer arrived quickly. Music was the obvious one. Spotify and the other services had already shown how easy it is for catalogs to shift, for albums to disappear, for the price to climb while the value stays the same. Navidrome fixed that. I pointed it at the music library on the NAS, and suddenly every track I had collected over the years was available on the phone, the laptop, the desktop, even the living room system. No ads, no recommendations designed to keep me scrolling, just the files. The interface can be made to feel clean and familiar, but the important part is that the music stays under my control. If the internet drops or a service decides to change its terms, Nothing changes on my end. Games followed the same path. I spent years buying physical media and digital copies. The physical ones were straightforward to preserve. The digital ones required more careful handling so that the files I paid for remained playable without needing the original storefront to stay online forever. ROM sits on the NAS and acts as the organizer. From any device that can run an emulator, I can reach in, pull the game I want, and play saves can sync back automatically in many cases. Right now, the current NAS can stream older generations cleanly through a browser with a controller. The next machine I am building will push that further. More power means more of the library can run natively on the server itself instead of relying only on the client device. That is the direction. Local first, remote access second, always under my keys. Kiwix sits alongside all of that. Full Wikipedia, other knowledge dumps, technical manuals, language resources, history collections. When you can open a browser and read any of it without leaving your own network, the feeling is different. You stop treating information as something that only exists when a company decides to keep the lights on. That matters more than most people realize until the day a page is gone or a topic becomes restricted. Having the offline copy does not make you paranoid. It makes you harder to cut off. The work never finishes. Every week, there is another service to harden, another backup job to verify, another piece of software to archive before a download link dies. Other people in this space talk about the same urgency. You hear it in the how-to videos. Get the systems in place. Get the data off other people's servers. The tone is consistent because the pattern is consistent. Platforms change rules. Payment processors decide what is allowed. Companies sunset physical media. The response is the same. Move the important things onto hardware you control. That process is exhausting. I will not pretend otherwise. There are days when the majority of my time goes into maintenance, testing, documentation, and planning the next upgrade. Content creation slows down because the energy is finite. The outlook shifts too. Once you start seeing every service as a temporary rental, it becomes harder to relax into any of them. You begin calculating single points of failure the way other people calculate monthly budgets. That is the other cage I mentioned. You escape the subscription cage and find yourself inside the prepper cage. Both require constant attention. The difference is that one of them leaves you with working systems when external conditions change, and the other leaves you waiting for permission. Debt reduction was part of the same push. Clearing the student loans and the tax debt removed two large external claims on future income. The remaining personal debt is the last piece. The goal is to finish it this year. Parallel to that, I stripped the bathroom and the daily routine down to products made from straightforward ingredients: soap, toothpaste, lotion, shaving cream, deodorant, nothing exotic. Just a quiet refusal to keep feeding a continuous consumer relationship for basic hygiene. Small decisions compound the same way technical decisions do. Redundancy became a standing rule. One drive fails, and the mirror still has everything. One income stream slows down, and the others keep the lights on. Entertainment has local copies first. Communication is the next frontier. I have looked hard at running my own email, not because I hate the big providers, but because email is infrastructure. If access becomes conditional on identity checks or policy changes, having a self hosted option matters. The same thinking applies to voice. Exploring VoIP setups that do not depend entirely on the major carriers gives another path if the normal channels tighten. Mesh networking is on the list for the same reason. Meshtastic and similar tools create local message networks that do not need the public internet to function. None of these are finished projects. They are options being built so that a single failure does not leave me silent. Creators face a sharper version of the same problem. YouTube is useful, it reaches people. It also means the relationship with the audience sits on someone else's land. Rules change, monetization shifts, topics become restricted, speech gets narrower. You end up measuring every sentence against an invisible set of guidelines that can move without notice. That is not freedom of expression. That is permission based expression. The logical response is to own the distribution layer. A site I control, an email list I control, a place where the work lives, even if the big platforms decide the content no longer fits their current brand. The principle is simple. If you do not own the infrastructure, you do not own the relationship. You are a tenant, and tenants can be moved. Knowledge compounds faster than most people expect. Linux made graphene OS understandable. The same foundation made media servers, remote access over SSH, and command line work on Mac OS feel natural instead of foreign. Emulation grew out of that base. Once you can preserve and run older software reliably, you stop needing the original company to keep its servers alive. Tailscale ties the pieces together so the library is reachable from anywhere without exposing the whole network to the public internet. Each skill lowers the cost of the next one. That is why documentation matters so much. Obsidian became the place where all of that knowledge lives. Apple Notes worked for casual lists. It falls short when you need real structure, linking, and long term retrieval. Obsidian uses plain markdown files stored locally. You can link notes to each other, build graphs of related ideas, and search across years of solutions in seconds. I treat it as a second brain. Every problem I solve gets written down once. Hardware quirks, software configurations, network setups, emulator settings. The next time the same issue appears, the answer is already there. Future me does not have to relearn what past me already figured out. That habit alone has saved hundreds of hours. Offline AI sits on the same machines. Olama running local models, Open Web UI as the interface, Automatic 1111, and Comfy UI for image work. No account, no usage caps that can be changed by policy, no data leaving the house. Research, drafting, and generation happen on hardware I control. The quality is not identical to the biggest cloud models, but the independence is complete. That trade off is worth it. The next NAS will push the media side further. More processing power means more of the game library can run directly on the server. Higher generations become practical. The current setup already handles and everything up through the older consoles cleanly. The upgrade path is clear. More storage, better redundancy, stronger remote access. The goal remains the same. The library stays available even if every commercial service decides to change its terms tomorrow. Health is moving in the same direction. I am learning practical herbal approaches within reason, not as a rejection of modern medicine, but as another layer of options. Growing some of the plants myself is the logical extension. Windowsill setups, simple indoor cultivation, basic knowledge of what can be grown and used without a continuous supply chain. Dependency reduction again. The same pattern that shows up in storage and software shows up in the body. All of this points at the same underlying rule. Reduce the number of external systems that can remove something essential from your life with a single decision. Housing is the largest version of that rule. Renting forever means you remain exposed to inflation and to someone else's choices about the property. If ownership where you currently live is not realistic, the rational move is to create options elsewhere. Second citizenship and property in places where buying is still possible are not about running away. They are about making sure there is always somewhere to go and something that belongs to you. A property under management can generate income while it sits as a fallback. Perfect safety does not exist. Better positioning does. Self sufficiency is hard to establish and easy to romanticize. The daily reality is maintenance, learning curves, and the quiet acceptance that you will never cover every possible failure. What you can do is remove the most obvious single points of failure. You can own the files, you can own the knowledge, you can own more of the hardware, you can own more of the attention that enters your head. You can own more of the relationship with the people who actually want to hear what you have to say. The speech side of this is real. On platforms that operate under heavy guidelines, the range of what can be said shrinks. Certain health topics become risky. Certain observations about the world become risky. The safe path is to repeat approved themes in approved language. Some viewers prefer that. It feels calm. The cost is that the conversation stays inside a gated garden that keeps getting smaller. George Carlin talked about this decades ago. Control the language, and you eventually control the range of thoughts that feel normal. When common expressions disappear because they are no longer allowed, the underlying ideas fade with them. That is not a conspiracy, that is an observable effect of restricted speech environments. The response is not to rage at the platform. The response is to build places where the full range of honest speech can exist without constant permission. Freedom in this context is not a slogan. It is the practical ability to keep living and creating when external systems change the rules. It looks like local storage, local servers, documented knowledge, multiple options for communication, and property that cannot be taken by a policy update. It looks like the willingness to do the unglamorous work of maintenance so that the important things remain available. It looks like accepting that the process never really ends and deciding the cost is still lower than permanent tenancy. I'm still in the middle of building all of this. Some pieces are solid, others are early. The exhaustion is real. The clarity is also real. Every system that moves under my control is one less place where someone else can decide I no longer have access. That is the work. That is what the subscription model was designed to prevent. And that is why the pushback has to be practical, daily, and owned. The weight of all this sits differently once you have lived inside it for a while. At the beginning, the ideas feel sharp and clean. You see the subscription model clearly, you see the exit ramps, and the work feels purposeful. Months later, the daily texture changes. The systems require feeding. The documentation has to stay current. The backups have to be verified. The mental list of unfinished pieces never gets shorter for long. That is the part most people do not talk about when they first start moving away from the rental model of life. I had to learn how to prioritize, or the whole project would have collapsed under its own ambition. Not everything can be built at once. Not every dependency can be removed in the same season. The practical order that worked for me was storage first, then media access, then knowledge systems, then communication options, then the slower layers like property and health knowledge. Storage is the foundation because everything else sits on top of it. Once the files are local and redundant, the rest becomes possible. If the files still live on someone else's servers, every other step remains fragile. For anyone listening who is not already deep into this, the starting point does not have to be a full home lab. It can be one external drive and a decision to stop treating cloud storage as permanent. Copy the important documents, the photos that matter, the projects that cannot be replaced. Make a second copy and put it somewhere else. That single act already changes the relationship to data. From there, a used machine running a simple media server is enough to begin reclaiming video and music. The interfaces do not need to be perfect. They need to work without requiring a monthly payment or an account that can be locked. The goal at the beginning is not elegance. The goal is a working alternative that you control. The mental shift is larger than the technical one. Most of us were trained to be consumers of finished services. You open the app, you pay the fee, you receive the experience. Building the alternative requires accepting an unfinished state for a long time. The interface will be uglier at first. The remote access will need occasional fixing. The documentation will have gaps. That discomfort is part of the price. The people who quit early usually quit because they expected the self hosted version to feel identical to the commercial one on day one. It does not. What it offers instead is permanence. Once the files and the software are yours, no policy update can remove them. That same shift applies to attention. Turning off the recommendation engines and the infinite feeds feels empty at first. The quiet is unfamiliar. The habit of checking for new outrage or new stimulation does not disappear overnight. What replaces it is slower. You choose a small set of sources and you return to them on purpose. The mind stops being pulled in 12 directions at once, where over time, the baseline anxiety drops. You notice how much of the previous tension was manufactured by the constant stream. That clarity has a cost in social currency. You will be less current on the daily drama. Some conversations will feel distant. The trade is worth it if the goal is a mind that is harder to steer from the outside. Content creation changed under this model. The volume dropped because the hours that used to go into rapid production now go into maintenance and building. There is no way around that in the early years. The upside is that the work that does get made sits on a stronger foundation. When the platform relationship is no longer the only distribution path, the pressure to shape every sentence for maximum algorithmic safety decreases. The long term plan is a place where the full range of what I actually think can exist without constant calculation. Until that is finished, the existing channels remain useful tools rather than the entire territory. Physical media has returned to the house in a way I did not expect. The old discs and cartridges are not nostalgia projects, they are working archives. A game that exists only as a license can vanish. A game that exists as a physical object and a verified dump on local storage cannot. The same is true for films and music that were bought in permanent form before the industry decided everything should be temporary. Keeping the physical copies and the local digital versions side by side is simple redundancy. One fails and the other remains. That principle scales to every other layer. Dependency reduction eventually reaches beyond technology. It touches expectations about help. The more you build systems that function without constant external input, the less you need to rely on institutions, platforms, or even well meaning people who may not be able to show up when conditions change. That is not a rejection of community, it is a refusal to treat other people's capacity as infrastructure. Friends and family remain important. They are not load bearing walls. The state is the same. Benefits and services can exist and still not be treated as permanent. The only durable position is the one that continues to function if those external supports move or disappear. The freedom I'm actually chasing looks less like a dramatic escape and more like a long series of quiet ownership decisions. In the One Piece story, the character keeps moving toward the thing that cannot be taken from him. The journey is full of setbacks and the destination keeps shifting, but the direction stays consistent. Maximum freedom in practical terms means the largest possible set of options under your own control. It means the ability to keep working, keep learning, keep accessing what matters, and keep a roof that cannot be removed by a policy change or a price spike. That version of freedom is expensive in time and attention. It is still cheaper than permanent tenancy. Progress is uneven. Some months the systems advance quickly, other months everything is maintenance and small repairs. The documentation grows. The list of future projects stays long. I still do not have the email server running the way I want. The mesh networking experiments are early. The more powerful NAS is still being planned and funded. The herbal knowledge is at the reading and small scale growing stage. None of that is failure. It is the normal pace of building infrastructure while also living a life. Anyone who presents this path as a clean 6-month transformation is selling something. The real version is measured in years of steady, imperfect work. What success looks like in a few years is not total isolation or total self sufficiency. That is neither possible nor desirable. Success looks like a much shorter list of things that can be taken away by a single external decision. The media library stays, the knowledge base stays, the ability to communicate through more than one channel stays. The property options exist, the skills compound instead of resetting every time a platform changes. The mind is quieter because the input is chosen instead of imposed. That is a realistic target. The audience side of this matters more than I used to admit. When the only place the work lives is on land controlled by someone else, the relationship with the people watching is always provisional. Building the independent layer is slower and reaches fewer people at first. It is also the only way the relationship can become durable. The people who actually want the long form, unfiltered version of these ideas will find it if the infrastructure exists. The ones who only wanted the algorithm friendly version will stay where the feeds are. Both outcomes are acceptable. I keep returning to the same core observation. The subscription model was never only about convenience, it was about converting ownership into continuous payment and continuous permission. Every time a company successfully moves a category of life into that model, the individual loses another lever. The response that works is not complaint. The response that works is the slow construction of working alternatives that do not require the same permission. Storage, playback, knowledge, communication, property, skills, attention, each one reclaimed is a small reduction in exposure. Most people will never build the full version of what I have been describing. That is fine. The useful question is not how to construct a perfect independent stack. The useful question is what is the smallest set of ownership moves that still changes the power balance in a noticeable way. Everything else is optional expansion. If someone is starting from a completely normal consumer setup, the first 90 days are not about buying hardware or learning new operating systems. They are about changing the default assumption that access equals ownership. The first concrete action is a quiet inventory. Open every account that holds files, photos, documents, purchase media, or ongoing payments. Write down what would actually disappear if the company decided the relationship was over tomorrow. Most people discover the list is longer and more painful than they expected. That list becomes the map. You do not have to solve every item at once. You only have to decide then which two or three would hurt the most if they vanished, and begin moving those first. The highest leverage early move is almost always the personal documents and the irreplaceable media. A single external drive and a simple repeated copy process already removes the most common form of quiet loss. The second move is usually the paid entertainment services that have already demonstrated they can remove titles without notice. Replacing even one of them with a local collection of things you actually paid for in permanent form changes the daily feeling of dependence. The third move is attention. Turning off the infinite recommendation surfaces and limiting the number of places that can push information into your head produces a clearer mind faster than most technical projects. Those three changes, done carefully over a few months, already put a person in a different category from the pure renter. False starts are expensive. The most common one is buying complicated hardware before the basic habits exist. A powerful server that sits half configured for 6 months teaches less than a cheap used machine that is actually running a simple service every day. Another expensive pattern is chasing perfect interfaces. People spend weeks making the local media setup look exactly like the commercial one they left, only to burn out before the system is stable. Function first, appearance later. A third trap is trying to eliminate every possible future risk at the same time. That produces paralysis. The workable approach is sequential reduction of exposure, not simultaneous total coverage. Once a few pieces are running, ordinary decisions begin to look different. A new subscription is no longer evaluated only by its monthly price. It is evaluated by how hard it would be to leave and by whether the thing it provides can be obtained in a form that survives the company's future policy changes. A new device is judged by how much of its useful life depends on continued cloud permission. Even small purchases start to carry an extra question. Does this increase the number of external switches that can be flipped against me, or does it decrease that number? The question becomes automatic. It does not make life more rigid, it makes the default consumer path less automatic. There is a social cost that rarely gets mentioned. When you stop living inside the same feeds and the same services as most of the people around you, conversations change. References that used to land now require explanation. Invitations to share the latest outrage or the latest platform drama feel slightly off. Some people interpret the distance as judgment. It is not. It is simply the result of spending attention on different inputs. The relationships that survive are the ones that were never primarily about sharing the same content stream. The ones that fade were thinner than they appeared. That sorting is uncomfortable and ultimately clarifying. Progress has to be measured differently, or the project feels endless. Completeness is the wrong metric. The better metric is the number of important functions that can no longer be switched off by a remote decision. Every file that lives on hardware you control, every service that continues when the internet is restricted, every skill that does not require a permission platform counts as a reduction in exposure. Some months, that number grows quickly. Some months, it only holds steady while you maintain what is already there. Holding steady is not failure. It is the normal maintenance cost of ownership. Low motivation stretches are inevitable. There are weeks when the work feels pointless, when the commercial services still look easier, when the quiet of a limited information diet feels more like isolation than clarity. What carries a person through those stretches is not inspiration. It is the memory of the last time an external system removed something that mattered. That memory is more reliable than enthusiasm. The other reliable support is documentation. When the future self can open a note and see exactly how a previous problem was solved, the current friction feels less permanent. The work becomes a continuation instead of a restart. Content creation and infrastructure building compete for the same hours. If they are not deliberately scheduled against each other, one of them will be neglected until it breaks. The pattern that has worked is treating the infrastructure tasks as non negotiable maintenance, the same way food and sleep are non negotiable, and then protecting a smaller but consistent block for actual production. The volume is lower than it was in the pure content years. The durability is higher. The audience that remains tends to be the one that prefers the longer, less filtered version of the thinking. That trade is acceptable. Looking further out, a decade of this kind of work does not produce a sealed fortress, it produces a different risk profile. The person who has steadily moved important functions under local control simply has more ways to continue when conditions change. Media stays available, knowledge stays searchable, communication has more than one path, property options exist in more than one jurisdiction. Skills compound instead of resetting with every platform shift. The mind is less reactive because the input is chosen. None of that is dramatic. All of it is measurable in the number of external permissions that are no longer required for ordinary life to continue. The rational case for continuing is simple. The subscription model is not stable in the long direction. Companies that successfully convert ownership into rental will keep expanding the categories they control. Policy, payment, identity, and platform rules will keep shifting. The person who treats every new convenience as permanent is repeatedly surprised. The person who treats convenience as temporary and ownership as the durable layer is less surprised. The work is ordinary and often tedious. The alternative is permanent exposure to decisions made by people who do not share your interests. Between those two options, the slow construction of working alternatives remains the more rational path, even when the finish line keeps moving and the daily effort feels small. That is the practical core. Start with the losses that would hurt most. Build only what you will actually maintain. Measure progress by reduced exposure rather than completeness. Accept the social friction as information. Protect the hours that keep both the systems and the creative work alive. Keep going in imperfect increments. The rest is expansion for people who want to go further. The minimum viable version already changes the balance. The longer you stay on this path, the clearer the real target becomes. It is not a finished fortress or a life completely detached from every external system. That version does not exist. What does exist is a steadily shorter list of things that can be taken from you by a single decision made somewhere else. Every layer you move under your own control reduces the surface area where someone else's policy, price change, or platform rule can interrupt your ability to live, learn, work, or create. That is the only metric that holds up over years. Completeness will always feel out of reach. Reduced exposure is measurable. You feel it when a service changes terms and nothing important in your daily life shifts. You feel it when the internet is restricted or unreliable and the things you actually need are still reachable. You feel it when the noise that used to shape your mood no longer has a direct pipeline into your head. Those moments are quiet. They do not announce themselves. They simply confirm that the work was not wasted. The same principle applies to the parts of life that are harder to quantify. Skills compound in ways that cannot be revoked. Once you understand how systems fit together, that understanding travels with you. Documentation turns temporary solutions into permanent reference. The habit of writing things down so your future self does not have to relearn them is one of the highest leverage practices available. Knowledge is the one form of ownership that survives almost every external change. No company can remote wipe what you have already internalized and recorded on media you control. Freedom in this sense is not a dramatic destination. It is the accumulated result of ordinary decisions repeated over time. The character in One Piece keeps moving toward the thing that cannot be taken from him. The path is messy, the setbacks are real, and the goal keeps expanding as he grows. The direction stays consistent. That is the closest description I have for what this process feels like. You are not trying to escape the world. You are trying to arrange your position inside it so that fewer single points of failure can stop you. I'm still in the middle of it. Some systems are solid, others are early or incomplete. The maintenance never fully disappears. The content still has to be made. The ordinary demands of life continue. None of that cancels the direction. The alternative is to remain a permanent tenant in every important layer of existence and hope the landlords stay benevolent. Hope is not a strategy. Ownership, even imperfect and partial ownership, is. If you are already doing versions of this work, you already know the texture of it. The days when it feels heavy. The days when a small piece finally clicks and the whole arrangement feels more stable. The quiet satisfaction of knowing that certain things are no longer provisional. If you are only beginning to see the pattern, start with the losses that would hurt the most and move those first. Do not wait for perfect conditions or a complete plan. The minimum viable reductions already change the balance. I do not know what the next several years will demand. I only know that the people who treat ownership as temporary and rental as permanent will keep being surprised. The people who reverse that assumption will still face difficulty, but they will face it with more options. That difference is worth the ordinary ongoing effort. That is the core of what I have been trying to say across these videos. Life was sold to us as more convenient when everything became a service. The convenience came with a quiet transfer of power. The response is not rage for its own sake. The response is the slow construction of working alternatives that do not require the same continuous permission. Storage, knowledge, skills, attention, property where it is still possible, communication paths that are not singular. Each one reclaimed is a small reduction in exposure. Over time, those reductions add up to a different way of moving through the world. If you are enjoying these angry guy videos, you can show support by buying me a raw Red Bull using the link in the description. What did you think about what was discussed? Do you agree? Leave a comment sharing your thoughts. Like the video if you like it. Don't forget to subscribe. And if you like the video, share the video. And just remember that all roads lead to MWA, men walking away, and cheers.
Nothing says you care like crypto. Nothing can compare. Nothing says you care like crypto. Oh, nothing can compare to crypto.